and welcome to Information Please, your Peoria Public Library on the air for things involving the public library and your community. Now tonight's show is kind of a reunion of sorts with us, isn't it?
Well, we see each other quite a bit, though.
We do, but very rarely do they let us take over as guest host and guest for the library show. And I'm very, very excited. Tonight's guest is Norm Kelly, the local Peorian historian. He has a very popular blog. And tonight we're going to talk about prominent Peorians. This is a very exciting time for Peoria because next year it's going to mark the 180th incorporation of the city of Peoria, as well as the 135th birthday of the Peoria Public Library.
Wow.
So yeah, this is all tying together so nicely, Mr. Kelly. I always appreciate that. Now tonight I'm also happy to say that we have some really incredible photos, and I'd like to make a special acknowledgement to a group that you work with quite frequently, our local history and genealogy office. Yeah. So I went down there and I spoke with one of our reference librarians, Amber Lowry, and her knowledge of the images and her accessibility to getting them and giving them to us, you'll see tonight that they are going to be a really nice enhancement to some of the people. So for some people in our audience who aren't familiar with your work, perhaps, or your blog, you are the author of how many books, would you say?
Well, I wrote 14, but I only published 12.
Okay, so we've got 12 published, 14 in the works. You have mentored countless people. You've written for Art and Society, you've written for News and Views, Healthy Cells, Illinois Adventurer. You won, was it the Clue magazine contest and went to New York City for mystery writing. And
issues and business issues or something, IBI.
Yes, inter-business issues. Most recently you wrote about prominent local Peorians in that episode.
Yeah, lately, I've done that in the last couple of years.
Well, and something, you came to me not long ago, and I thought that you were done writing, and yet you can't seem to shake it.
I don't understand, because it isn't that I don't want to do it. I don't want to have to do it. And that's, and I'm the one who decides that, and yet there I continue to go on.
Yes.
What I like, we didn't mention the Peorian, which I've written for them.
Paul Gordon's magazine, a wonderful magazine.
One of our favorite friends.
Yes.
And the fact that they even will occasionally rewrite one of my books in another magazine, which we get permission. And so I really think that Peoria is just so blessed to have that type of magazine and those editors and those people and the writers.
Well, and we're very blessed to have historians and writers like you who are willing to go out there and not just uncover, but to commemorate people who have made our community so special.
Starting way back there.
Starting way back. Now, I do want to say this. So you're currently working on a project, and I don't want to call it a book because I know you're not certain where you're going to take this, but it's called A Child of the City, and it's featuring prominent Peorians. And when we last talked, you had written 16,000 words, which blew my mind, and out of maybe 200 biographies that you were focusing on, and I'm sure that list is growing, 75 of them were done, or close to it.
I'm over 40,000 words.
Over 40,000, so we haven't seen each other for a couple of weeks.
That's
You've been
right.
busy.
And what sometimes it really amounts to be accomplishing only one a day, meaning finished.
Right.
So that means I have to research it, and of course, thank God for the library people. And then once I do, then I even go online and look and see if there's something that they're saying. And what I've discovered, so many things that they have written are just not true.
Right.
They're just not true.
Well, let's kind of start with uncovering some of those things. Tonight we're going to focus on a few. We're going to go back, I think, to 1832. We're going to go back to the beginning, to a Mr. Roos. We're going to have you start about him.
Well, technically, it's Dr. Roos.
Okay.
Not a wonderful picture?
It's a wonderful picture.
I don't even think I've seen that photograph. I mainly concentrate on his buildings and something, but that's really, he's such a dynamic human being. He was a surgeon in the 1812 war.
Oh my gosh.
And he lived in St. Louis. And someone told him about the beauty of the Illinois Valley. And so he came up here. He would come by a steamboat. And he came up here, and when he saw it, he just fell in love with it. I think we had 6 or 7 cabins or something. What he saw I don't know, but he loved the valley and the whole promise of the land. And so he brought his family up here. He ended up having 4 or 5 other kids. And he was really the first resident physician. We had a doctor that would stop by here, but he stayed here and built his own practice. And it was astounding what he did to bring in other physicians and other businessmen. He is the father of this city. And for the first 6 years, he was president of the local council, you know.
Right.
And that's when they decided to become a town in 1835. And of course, he was behind our becoming a city in 1845. He then had built here by other people, of course, a beautiful building called Roos Hall. It took up the entire block of Jefferson and Main. And he also had his practice in that, but they bought other property too.
Okay.
And he's the one who formed the Peoria Medical Society.
Oh my goodness.
And then, because there were so many quacks in town, and in my article I tell you who they are, and he just did not like that. He was truly a wonderful physician, but you have to analyze what did he really know in those days. But he knew enough. And so he also formed the Illinois State Medical Society.
Right out of Peoria.
And he was just a brilliant person. And finally, when he died here, his family then moved to Philadelphia. We have really no remnant of him.
The building no longer stands?
No.
Oh,
we
sad.
had a street. You know what? Maybe in the Heights there could be a Roos.
Okay.
Maybe. But other than that, nobody knows about him. And yet he was the very essence of leadership and quality of a man. Truly a wonderful person.
And certainly one of the things that people always talk about when they reference Peoria is that we have absolutely world-class medical facilities. And all you have to do is drive from downtown up Knoxville to see these wonderful hospitals and facilities that we have. So it really seems like we can owe our thanks to Dr. Roos for coming and establishing that high level of satisfaction.
And then the sisters come in 1874 or something like that.
Right.
And don't forget John Proctor.
Of course.
And then the Methodist Hospital. Those 3 hospitals competed against each other. Don't forget they were religious. You don't think for 1 second a Catholic person in, let's say, before the turn of the century would want to be born or died in a method. No, they wouldn't, and that's who they were. And they were always competitive and respectful of each other. But the point is, the competitiveness is what drove this town from the beginning. Well, we're not over yet, I hope.
Not over yet. We're in the middle of it.
Hope
I mean,
so.
if you read Peoria Progress magazine, we're kind of coming into a second renaissance,
You know.
which is exciting. And this is another good time to talk about our second prominent Peorian.
Absolutely.
And in this group, the only woman in this show this evening, but what a woman. Behind me is Lydia Moss Bradley.
That's right. And a remarkable lady from the very beginning. From the very beginning, when she came here, and then when she meets Tobias Bradley, and they get married. And you know, the tragedy in their life is that they had 6 children, and they all died. And Tobias was kicked by his own horse and died from those injuries. And then you'd think the poor widow, though, now what am I going to do? Well, she was an astute business lady, philanthropical lady.
Incredible.
And, of course, gave us. There was a horology building on the campus that's still there. She actually purchased that property and maintained that. My father graduated from it way back in 1920-something. And then she founded Bradley Polytechnic. Is it Technic?
Yes.
I think so. And began to acquire more money even because she's such a wonderful business lady. She sat in on a lot of boards where they're all been, you know. She's just a small little lady. Of course, I only picture her as being old, always, right? Because we
Right.
see only those. But I've seen her other pictures, and she was just a typical nice, young, attractive enough lady for that period of time. And when Tobias was killed, you know something that I ask in some of my lectures? Suppose Tobias had lived. Suppose her 6 children had lived.
Right.
Do you think for 1 second we would have Bradley Park, Bradley University?
The statue of,
in my
right,
view,
of Lydia?
no.
Probably
I mean,
not.
that's my own view. Why? Because she was a mother
Right.
and a businesswoman, and together they were interested in taking care of themselves, and of course gave money to certain things, and she was on the board of all kinds of things.
Yes.
And she was actually nationally known, and was just a kind of she wasn't a ha-ha, isn't thing wonderful, you know, because she struggled and worked and maintained her dignity and all the things that go with it, and so she was business. Mm-hmm. She's all business, some of the people would say, yeah.
She was very savvy.
And don't forget the word sad.
And sad.
Think
yeah.
about it.
That's true. She encountered an awful lot of sorrow in her life.
That's right.
And turned it around and allowed her activities to benefit so many others.
And that was exactly her intent.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful?
She achieved it. It's I think everybody feels very special when they walk by her statue at Bradley, and certainly
right.
many of her personal artifacts are in the special collections up there, as well as at the Historical Society.
Of course, she was honored in so many other ways. But again, these are the details you'll find in a child of the city.
Yeah.
Now remember, they're not all born here.
No.
So when I say child of the city, we included those who stayed here long enough to be virtually adopted. That's what I call them.
Right.
They're the adopted children, but there's many of them that were born here. But I wonder if Lydia would have to be proud of what she sees today. I mean, because her vision was beyond anybody else's vision. And she's a tough enough lady to get it done.
Yes.
And that's the thing I think I admired her in that period of time. You know,
It was very
today we
unusual.
have so many incredibly strong ladies, but in those days it was very rare.
You know, we talk now about women breaking through the glass ceiling in today's age, but certainly even if you look at Lydia in her older years, you can realize that she really had a lot going against her and must have worked very hard to earn the respect and get the ear of all these people in town who would take her seriously and take her endeavors to heart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know of enemies of a lot of our people, but I never ran across a spoken word that ended up in print that had anything to say badly about her.
Well, and the nice thing also I'd like to point out about Lydia is that people can visit her grave and pay their respects to her and Tobias. They are buried in Springdale Cemetery off of Prospect, and flowers are replaced there every week. And so it's a lovely cemetery. It tells a great deal of its own history of Peoria, but they can certainly pay their respects to this amazing woman right on that side of town. Now that also brings us to another famous gentleman, and many people have been by his incredible house, Mr. Greenhut.
Truly the ugliest house I'd ever seen in the city. If you ever take a look at it, and I've been in there, at the time it must have been elegant and beautiful.
Okay.
Oh, but when I drive by there, I say, if I had your money there, old man, I'd have had something up on Moss Avenue. You know, and he had it.
Yeah.
But don't forget, he came here later in the 1880s, and he was a liquor man. And he never really owned a distillery. Never. He ran the Weston, the Great Western, which was the largest one in the world. But he was the president and the stern hand behind the alcohol endowment, which had 65 of these distillers under his wing. And we had 700 of them. People would be surprised. We had 700 in the United States. 600 sold whiskey to drink, and then the others industrial.
Sure.
And they constantly battle lobbyists and beer drinkers and Peoria. When he came in town, and of course had beautiful offices, his job at that time was, of course, to promote whiskey, not only his own, but this whole conglomerate, you know. So
Sure.
he was busy. But another man who looked at Peoria and realized this is the future of whiskey.
Yes.
But he's a Johnny-come-lately, because we already had established it here.
Certainly.
But not on the global and the whole idea that he had. And of course, by then we had the railroads, the steamboats were important, the trucking firms. He was behind getting this booze from here over there and competing with Canada and the other distilleries. You know. Then he gave money here, including, I don't know if people realize that the GAR building has his name on it.
Yeah, and it's on there on the front.
It says
it's a
the
beautiful
Green
building.
Hut.
Yeah.
And of course, admittedly, he gave $13,000, and maybe that's the reason why. How do we know if he didn't say, yeah, and put my dad's name up there
Sure.
too? We don't know that.
We don't know. It has been designated a landmark by Central
That's right.
Illinois Landmark Foundation.
And it's just a wonderful little park. There's a tiny little
is.
park next door.
That's right.
General Shakakakakakili or something. I could never pronounce his name. And even they, you know, he came to Bradley at Peoria, a wonderful person. Of course, he's in the book. But that little GAR building has really represented so much to Peoria and the people that wanted to remind people of the war that they were in.
Yeah,
But,
nice tribute.
and then finally, then in 1917, our distilleries and our breweries are shut down because of a phony thing during World War I. And he left. And so they all went. Think of all that money that walked out
Walked out the
town.
door, yeah.
And then he went to New York and was in railroading, and also president of a massive dry goods store.
Oh my
Brilliant, genius, chose to come here, and if you were a dry person, you know, he's the devil apparently. You know, that's what they thought.
But his
of him.
money certainly brought in a boom, an economic boom, whether you drank, whether you took to the drink or not.
To churches.
To churches,
and
yeah.
to other buildings in town, and the mere
development.
fact that Green Hut lived in Peoria, that's all. There were a lot of
right.
people came because they sought his advice, and he said, why don't you open that up right here?
Yeah.
And that's how
he
they did
drew a
it.
lot of business.
He did.
So that brings another incredible, prominent, adopted Peorian, I would say. I run the steamboat race every year, and every year we get to run by this statue, and it just excites me to see Mr. Ingersoll every single time and think about his impact, not just in Peoria, but globally.
The world.
The world.
Robert Greene Ingersoll came here in 1857. Now, we're a city. He didn't do anything about changing us.
Right.
He had a law practice with his brother, and I've written several stories. He and R.G. Letourneau are the two people that people email me from as far Australia, Russia, even Boston. Can you imagine? Somebody from
Exotic.
Boston writing me in Peoria about Robert Ingersoll.
Yeah.
And he was an orator up there with Patrick Henry, Daniel Webster. This man, every very prominent person before the turn of the century had something to say about this great agnostic.
Yes.
And so he, agnostic, here's a man who was beyond belief as far as his ability to speak and his oratory and things that he did, but he was just an agnostic. You got it? One word defines a man that would humble anybody that ever got in a discussion with him. He was so brilliant. He was also our Attorney General, and he had a very successful practice and Supreme Court cases that he tried.
Yes.
He, of course, had his practice right here, but he was rarely here, you know. But the idea that here is a man that would seek the truth and take on the so-called brains, the religious people, the brilliant businessmen, you name it, he would arrange for these great debates, and people would spend hours watching them. And he stayed here for 20 full years, which astounds me, considering that he can live anywhere he wants.
People certainly wanted him to live other places. Yeah.
Internationally famous. spoke everywhere, introduced all kinds of top political people, and never really, I say he didn't run for office because you were appointed the Attorney General. But otherwise, he's such a flamboyant person. And right here in this library, the library has virtually everything that he wrote. And he wrote a couple of books, and the one he wrote with tongue-in-cheek was Why I Am an Agnostic. I mean, that's what you're calling me, I'll tell you why. And he was just magnificent, very famous here in town, and went on to be, I called him in one of my articles, Peoria's most famous citizen. And of course, people say, no, that's Richard Pryor. And having nothing against Richard Pryor, because he was truly unbelievably famous. But to put a balance, how he made a living and how this man made a living, it's a slightly different
livings,
what do they
huge
call
impacts.
Apples and oranges.
I believe they call them both apples and
And
oranges.
of course, Richard had no real interest in Peoria, Illinois. This man loved Peoria, Illinois.
In fact, I believe that Mr. Ingersoll's office was not very far from the Green Hut, from the GAR Hall downtown. In fact, I think there's a car rental place there now. So then the next guy, the last person who we're going to close this out with for this session is going to be Eugene Baldwin. Again, I was not familiar. So once again, you're teaching me, Mr. Kelly.
Just think, Eugene Baldwin came here and was broke. He was always broke. But he was a magnificent writer, wonderful editor, and debating him would be the dumbest thing that you ever did. I'd love to have seen him and Ingersoll just have an ordinary subject in Peoria about closing our golf courses. I would just love to sit there and let those two argue about it, because they were the most brilliant that we ever developed in our town. And I blame Peoria, Illinois. I think they were influenced by the people here, the place, and I think although they were brilliant, this place inspired them. And I list another 80 people that did it too, by the way. And he started and founded the Journal, and he founded the Star. Amazing. And when I grew up, there was a Journal and there was the Star.
And which was the morning? Was there a morning and an afternoon?
Yeah, but I would only guess it was the Morning Star.
Ah, okay.
And I delivered them for both of them. I wasn't very good at that. But he was an editor, and of course he did his own a column, and it had editorials, traveled around the world, and he would pick a side politically.
Yeah.
And
wow.
I pity you if you were on the other side. And he had a daughter named Sydney, and Peoria called Eugene the great philosopher, and they called her the philosopher's daughter.
Oh, okay.
And she's in the book because she ended up owning 51% of the paper and wrote articles from all over the world for 50 years.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine who she was and who he was. And he would push the city, push the council, push the alderman and our mayor, and really attack them in an old grandfather's way and try to really cajole them. Well, you make enemies, and somebody who thought he said a little too much negative about him got in somewhat of a fight. I mean, the man was 70-some years old, and he pushed him, and he fell down on the ground, and a few days later he died. And the people were up in arms, walking in the streets. They wanted this man tried for murder. But he died 9 or 10 days later of some type of infection, and the medical examiner said, no, that's a natural death. But it was major news in this town. And then he died. That's when Sydney took over the place. But when I said it was broke, when the first day he was ready to print, Sydney, of course, was all excited because she wrote down everything he did, and later on wrote her own columns. But she worked all her life for him.
Oh my gosh.
Shadowed by her dad, believe me, because she was so brilliant herself. he went down to pick up ink. He got the supply from a railroad track or something, a railroad company, and he had to borrow the $12 for the ink. And he said we started with 2 buckets of ink and $12 in debt. Now that's how he did. And the greatest thing the man ever did to Peoria was opened an absolutely driving force behind the Peoria Opera House.
Oh, wonderful.
Truly most beautiful building in Illinois' history, let her go at that. One of the top 5. And they opened in 1882, and he was the speaking opening act. But he was truly a remarkable man.
Well, what a legacy for him to leave for us and the Peoria Journal-Star. And we're going to pick up some more of these prominent Peorians in next week's episode. Before we close out, I would like to remind people that we have an incredible art display going on at the main library art gallery with married couple Ken and Barbara Hoffman doing both paintings and photographs. They don't collaborate, they do separate individual bodies of work, and it's only the 3rd time that they've been on display together. Also at the main library, you can see the incredible gourd artistry of Mike Schuler. He takes gourds to a whole new level, and you'll never look at a cornucopia again the same way. October 26th at the North Branch brings our monthly Music in the Mackenzie series with popular musicians Switchback. They've played before, they got on the chairs last time, and things got a little rowdy, but they were so popular, we had them back. And we have to thank the Illinois Arts Council for providing a grant to help underwrite some of that. Again, you can find more of Norm's writings in News and Views magazines, IBI Magazine, Illinois Adventurer, Art and Society. You can hear him weekly on Royce and Roger, the radio show on 90.7 Wazoo Radio on Thursday mornings. And of course, you can find his stories anytime on his blog, Peorian Historian, just Google it, or at peoriapubliclibrary.org, where we have an entire page devoted to Norm's work. So for tonight, we thank you for joining us for Information Please, your on-air Peoria Public Library program. Until next time.
See you later.
See you later.